The Russian economy is a war economy and not doing well. This is contrary to all the economic evidence we've seen, but I'll let you listen. Number 12.
We have evolved our support to Ukraine as the war has evolved. The needs of the Ukrainians on the battlefield have changed, and they are still changing. And we are trying to stay apace with that. That's why we're in constant conversations with them. I would also, want to remind people that everything Ukraine is getting is in concert with them and meeting their needs, their asks, and we're trying to, again, stay apace of that. But I think it's also, the last thing I'll say, and then I promise I'll end the answer, is take a look at what Russia has suffered. And the president alluded to some of this in his speech. More than 350,000 casualties. A million young people leaving the country because they don't want to be there anymore. An economy that's basically a war economy and not doing that well. Russia has suffered a lot at the hands of Ukraine, and because they have invested so much of their energy and effort into this war. Mm-hmm. And not just the United States, but 50 some odd nations can take some credit for that, because we helped arm and help train and help resource the Ukrainian soldiers that are fighting so bravely.
I think it's hogwash, but I'm happy to hear what you have to say. Please, Colonel.
Well, my first remark is to repeat a previous remark and say Admiral Kirby needs to go back to sailing ships, except he'd probably sink them. So I won't say that. The war has changed, he says. First point. You bet it's changed. You bet it's changed. Precisely the way I and other smart military professionals said it would change. Ukraine is losing big time. Second, we're giving them aid in concert with their needs. Okay, their needs are now that they are losing astronomically badly. So what are you going to give them? Nuclear weapons? Third, Russia has suffered. I've got the economic reports. I've got the graphs. I've seen what China and India are doing for Russia's economy. I've seen what 4.6 billion people in the world who are still trading with Russia are doing for the economy. I've seen the figures on GDP dedicated to defense. That's being done for preparation for what Putin thinks might be an existential move on his SCTO area by NATO. That's not a ruined economy. That's an economy that is looking a lot like ours was looking in 40 and 41 when we suddenly turned to it in order to get ready to be the arsenal of democracy.
There's a class of Russians in Moscow who often say to each other, "Thank you, Joe Biden."
Yes.
Because the sanctions have forced the Russians to develop an economic independence and prosperity beyond what they ever thought they could. I got to play another clip. I know it's going to raise your blood pressure a little bit. It's Admiral Kirby again. But the essence of this is that Putin has stalled out. Number 13.
I do think it's important to remember they haven't made much progress. For all the effort and the ballyhooing about what they were doing or trying to do at Kharkiv, they've basically stalled out. Once they hit the first line of Ukrainian defenses, that was kind of it. And now they're reassessing, we think, about what they might do next. So they still can be within range of Kharkiv. I don't want to diminish that. That's why we're giving the Ukrainians permission to strike across border at imminent threats. But they have largely stalled out. And Mr. Putin has achieved none of his strategic objectives.
What material misrepresentations he's making.
He's just proving what I said, but in spades. He needs to go back to the water. I'm not even sure he'd do any good on the water where it's flat and the winds sometimes whip the waves up, but you don't have the kind of things that you have in ground warfare. You look at the situation and you say, okay, yeah, maybe in one little aspect, you're right. The Russians seem to be somewhat paused right now. That's because Putin has said again and again and again, I'm ready to talk. I'm ready to sit down. You are going to lose the diplomacy that takes place there probably, but you need to be willing to take that chance for a ceasefire and a peace agreement. And I'm not going to do anything other than invest the land that I've taken until I'm sure that you're not going to do anything against me. That's my deal. We can negotiate. It's over. Now, if you think it's not and you want to keep escalating, go back to his words that we just articulated and talked about.
So one more tick up on your blood pressure. Shortly after Tony Blinken, Secretary Blinken, announced that President Biden had approved the use by the Ukrainians, and we know this involves Americans because there are secret codes involved that only Americans have access to fire American weaponry into Russia. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov said this, number one.
We have shown that we will not put up with this, and that we will not allow Ukraine to be used as a direct threat to our security, as an instrument for the destruction of everything Russian on historical Russian lands. They did this for more than 2 decades, or even 30 years, immediately after the disappearance of the Soviet Union. Their goal was to destroy everything Russian, from the language to the government in this territory, which they wanted to take for themselves. And they were counting on it. But as always happens, if they wake up the Russian bear, then our people have united like never before. These are not empty words. We saw this during the Russian presidential elections. The Nazi regime continues to use Western weapons to attack civilian targets, towns, and cities. I assure you that they will not be able to cross this line unnoticed.
That's the consequence of no diplomacy.
It is.
Tony Blinken, Secretary Blinken, refusing to take Foreign Minister Lavrov's phone calls.
Which is just an absurdity.
How many times did Colin Powell talk to his Russian adversary, or with what regularity?
On their cell phones, much to the chagrin of the National Security Agency, almost every day.
Good. No, but to be serious for a minute.
He would get calls from the DCI. He would get calls from Tenet. You got to quit doing that, Colin. I'm doing diplomacy, George, something you don't know anything about.
But my point is, this is what happens when Blinken is not doing his job. You get this kind of...
He's scared, Judge. He's scared. He's frightened. He knows he's out of his element, certainly with Sergei, but with Wang Yi, too. So the two prominent security threats, if you will, to the United States, ultimately, their diplomats are so superior to Tony Blinken that he won't even take their phone calls or talk to them. That's what it boils down to. And I'm afraid that it probably boils down to that with respect to Putin and Biden and Xi and Biden, ultimately. We are outclassed, Judge. We're outclassed, and it's a dramatically bad situation for us because we are outclassed. That's when you go to things like nuclear weapons, is when you get completely outclassed diplomatically, and you nonetheless hoist yourself out there on that spit out over the ocean, and you look down and you say, uh-oh, I don't have anywhere to go. You got yourself in a mess. And we are in such a mess over both Ukraine and Gaza for different reasons. But look at this ceasefire deal that was going to go down in Gaza. Netanyahu has used it to tie Joe Biden's hands behind his back. And he's got his own problems in his own right wing of the Likud that he's tied up and put in handcuffs to by using the very thing that he said he was going to do good with to Joe Biden. We're just outclassed, Judge. We're outclassed across the board.
Chris, do we have the tape of Admiral Kirby? Sorry, Colonel, saying it's an Israeli idea, it's an Israeli idea, it's an Israeli idea? While you're looking for it.
That proposal, an Israeli proposal, has been given to Hamas. It was done on Thursday night, our time. We're waiting for an official response from Hamas. We would note that publicly, Hamas officials came out and welcomed this proposal. Well, this was an Israeli proposal. We have every expectation that if Hamas agrees to the proposal, as was transmitted to them, an Israeli proposal, that Israel would say yes.
Sy says it wasn't an Israeli proposal, that it's a political stunt by the president of the United States, and Netanyahu is acting like, what are you, crazy? You want my government to dissolve if I embrace this thing?
That Kirby presentation there reminded me, Judge, of when Condi Rice was asked about the 16 words in President George W. Bush's State of the Union address. Those words that said, we've heard from the British that Saddam Hussein has been seeking uranium in Niger. Right. And when Condi got caught, she said 3 times, if I had known that the director of the CIA, if I had known that George Tenet, if I had known that the CIA disagreed with that, he never would have said it. That's Kirby. If I'd known Israel, Israel.
Wow. Well, we've occupied you long enough. This is one of the more fascinating conversations I've ever had on this program, Colonel. From what you said about Cuba to Condi Rice to George Bush to George Tenet to Vladimir Putin to Joe Biden to Tony Blinken to Sergei Lavrov. Your insight and your derived from your great personal experience and your intellect and your personal courage is extraordinary. It is a joy for us to have you on the show, and I'm personally very grateful. And I know, because I can see the numbers and I can read what people are saying, the viewers are as well. Thank you so much, Colonel, and have a great weekend.
You too. And let me ask you a favor. If they
Sure.
come through my door, will you defend me?
Yes. I'll be your shield. I'll take a bullet for you, Colonel. God love you.
Take care.
Thank you.